noticed, especially at the beginning, there were a lot of influences of what our fathers, church fathers, excelled at that affected what is being done. They care about the music and the arts, also the sciences and the math and caring for people. And though it's very important to modernize them, keep going forward, it's also important to learn about our identity and who we are. And especially speaking from personal experience, because I can't speak Syriac. I can read, I can understand, but I can't speak. And for a while that made me feel as though I'm less Syriac, or not Syriac enough because of it. And learning more about the church fathers and the writings and the hymns and the music helped me identify more with my church. So what are the resources available for the youth about all these diverse things in our church history and culture that we can learn from in order to identify more with the church?
Before answering that question, Christine, I would like to make two observations. One of them is, as a church, we had great institutions of knowledge in the past, and I'm happy to say that the first university, I think in the world, in the entire world, was the school of Nusaybin during the days of Mor Yaqub of Nusaybin and Mor Ephraim, the Syriac. And we are talking about the end of the 3rd and beginning of the 4th centuries. That's when we had a university. Europe was still in the dark ages. I believe the first European university in Italy, in Bologna, where was it? Bologna. It was around 900 to 1000, year 900 to 1000, so almost 700 years after we had our own university. And Nusaybin was one of them. Then Edessa, the school of Edessa also was university, and many other monasteries. And these were not schools teaching only theology and Bible exegesis, interpretation and so forth. They were schools that were teaching mathematics, astronomy, medicine, all kinds of sciences that were known those days. So we had a great history in education. Therefore, we felt the necessity to have our own university now. The other observation I would like to make is that you don't have to know Sirioyo to be Sirioyo, although we would like everyone to know Sirioyo. We hope every member. But our church is what we call Catholic with small c, universal church. That means there are many nations and tribes and tongues, languages within this church. Our church started in Antioch, where there were Syriac, Aramaic, but also Greek elements in the church. It was only after the split, the first split in the 5th century, that our church started becoming more and more Syriac. Many of our great patriarchs were not Syriac-speaking persons. Some of them may have been of Syriac origin, but their education was Greek. So when the church split, we still had Greek-speaking people in our church, and they were Syriac-speaking people on the other side of the church, which is today the Rome Orthodox Byzantine Church or the Chalcedonian Church. And then we can never forget about our church in India, which is part of our church from the early centuries. And the people of India are not Syriac in blood. Although there is a group, a community, we call the Knanaya, who trace their origin in Edessa. They are from Urfa, from Edessa. But the rest of the church, they are Indian people who joined our church in the early centuries. And then later, we had people joining our church, not joining, they were part of the church in Asia, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Iran, Persia. They were all members of the church, but they were not necessarily Syriac-speaking people. And in modern history, modern times, we have a very growing and thriving church in Latin America. These are, for example, in Guatemala, these are Mayans. We went there, we visited. They have great faith, but they don't even look like us. They are as Syriac, as members of the Syriac Church as we are. And there are Brazilians and others also. So I'm not saying this to discourage you from learning Syriac. No, Syriac is a holy language, is the language of the church, is a very rich language. Try to learn a little bit if you if you don't know it already. Try to learn a little bit of Syriac. But we should never look at the non-Syriac speaking people as strangers or foreigners to the church. They are not. They are members of the church. Now going back to your question. Obviously we have to make use of the technology we have today. In addition to the regular traditional schools we have, and we have many of them throughout the world, here in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, but also in other parts of the world, we have elementary, secondary schools where we teach also Syriac. But now there is a great opportunity which should not be missed, and that is the social media, the internet, the online courses, and there are quite many being offered, both by members of the church, but also by scholars and non-Syriac, non-members of the church, institutions, for example, belonging to other churches, to some universities. And if I may share with you just one, you mentioned music, and I'm happy you mentioned music, because music has very distinctive role in our church, in our prayers, in our liturgies. And we have, I can rightly claim that the Syriac music is the essence and the basis of the entire Eastern music, whether it's Arabic, Kurdish, Turkish, they have to do with Syriac music. That's where they started. Now we have, for example, a very good app. It's called Bergazo. It was developed in the Eastern Archdiocese in the United States with Malfono George Kiraz and some other Shamosh working on it. Yes, one of them is there too. He worked on it. Isa was part of it too. Where you can find almost all church hymns and qole. You want to know, for example, any of the qole that we use during the Shimo, the simple days, or the Sundays, Saturdays and Sundays, you go to that app, you search the qole, and you find it in its 8 tunes, and sometimes there are also shuhlofa, we call the alternatives. Also, they are all there in one app. And there are many apps for prayers, for liturgies, for services, and for Syriac language. So this is a great opportunity and a calling for some of you who are very savvy in technology and in IT. Please contact your parishes, your clergy, your priests, your churches, and offer your services. Encourage them. If they have not done so far, encourage them to do something online for the youth in your area, for example. But nowadays there is no specific area. The whole world is, as we say, is a global village. From here you can access anything, anywhere you want in the world.
داودي سيدنا